All right, awesome. Good afternoon. Welcome to Car Hacking 101, the practical guide to automotive security. But before that, I'm going to thank everyone for coming to my talk. Thank you so much for coming here. And all thanks to Hack in the Box as well for having me here. Let me quickly give you the background for this talk. Car hacking has already made the headlines in the news. So the goal of this talk is to help you get started in automotive security. Well, automotive security is a really broad term. I'll spend most of my time talking only about the exploitation of CAN bus. Because entry barrier to the car hacking is much more higher compared to other security fields. So this talk, I hope, can play an important role in clearing that entry barrier. I'll definitely help you get started with the car hacking. Car hacking in particular, we'll be talking about the CAN bus exploitation. The goal here is to help you get started cheap, easy, and fast. Any tools that I'll be talking here about will be all free and open source. So even if you don't own a car, you can still practice the car hacking, CAN bus exploitation freely, and using the tools like ICSim, CAN utils, socket CAN, and all this stuff. Also, even if you own the car, you don't have to worry about breaking your car. What you can do is you can install the simulator that I'll mention here on your favorite Linux distribution, like Kali, Ubuntu, whatever you feel like. And you can just get started easily. Just to start off a little bit about me, my name is Yogesh and I'm from Nepal. I do work as a cybersecurity analyst for Tata Consultancy Service India with my primary research areas in IoT security, hardware hacking, and mobile application security. Apart from security stuff, I love to build robots. I build robots for fun. Also, feel free to follow me on Medium. I sometimes write about my findings, cool stuffs on IoT, and sometimes I write about machine learning and computer vision as well. So feel free to follow me on Medium. It's medium.com/@Yogesh Ojha. So let's look into today's agenda. I'll spend most of my time talking about the hardware and software system available in the car in the vehicle, and then after that, I'm going to move into the vehicle communication network. So all of the components that is being interacting in your car happens through CAN. We'll talk about what is CAN network. We'll even talk about what is issue in your car and how do they function. After that, we'll look a vehicle from a security standpoint. We'll look what are the entry points to hack into a car and how to exploit them. And then we have a couple of demos on how to sniff and exploit the CAN bus on a simulator. And then I'll give you an introduction to tools like CAN utils and socket CAN. These CAN utils and socket CAN are the native libraries for the in the Linux for CAN bus. And then towards the end, I do have demo on ICSim where I will show you a demo on how to spoof the tachometer. You can install the simulator on your home and you can just go back and practice simulating this tachometer, side lights and all this sort of stuff. After that, I'll help you with the further resources. If you really want to get started into car hacking, if this is what interests you, I'll share some of the resources towards the end of this talk. Little disclaimer, this talk by no means is an exhaustive talk in automotive security because automotive security is a really broad term. This is just about CAN exploitation. This is a one-on-one talk to help you get started with the car hacking and to clear the entry barrier. So if you already have a knowledge in car hacking, CAN bus exploitation, then there's very little that you might be able to learn from here. Most of the things that I'll be talking here will only cover the basics of CAN bus exploitation and basics of car hacking. And for beginners, please be advised that this talk doesn't make you a zero to hero in automotive security in X or Y minutes. There's so much to do in car hacking, even in the CAN bus. You have got key fob attack, you have all these sort of attacks on infotainment system, Bluetooth attack, and all these sort of attacks. That's it. So with this quick disclaimer, let's get started on how car performs and how does the modern car functions. Modern cars are no longer just a mechanical component. There's a number of components networked together, responsible for monitoring and controlling the state of the computer. When you're driving a car today, you're driving a hugely powerful computer system that happens to have wheels and steering. There's nothing in a car that is not mediated by the computer. Modern cars are less of a hardware than it used to be. They're currently more focused on software. You have got this Tesla autopilot systems, all these sort of cars that are focused mainly on the software. And also now most of the car come with the internet connectivity as well. So you have the computers in the car that makes very, very fast calculation that runs on top of your wheels. As the current automobile now relies on computer for everything, from your engine control, climate control, braking, steering, navigation, infotainment system, airbags, and so much. If you look carefully, there was a research conducted by a group of researchers that they found the modern cars are so complex that they run around 100 million lines of code, whereas you compare with the F-22 Air Force jet fighter, it only had 1.7 million lines of code. And with this commercial flight plane, Boeing 787 Dreamliner has just 6.5 million lines of code. So basically, the more fancier your car, the more features your car has, the more lines of code and the more number of issues and the more number of hardware and software component it's gonna have. So yes, your car has a code, but your car is much more than that. It's a computer, and moreover, there's a huge network just below the car. So it's really a fast computer on wheels. This is because of the few reasons. We now have Tesla autopilot system, so much complex that you need modern systems to run them. Auto braking, adaptive cruise control, airbags, motor infotainment systems, and so much in a modern car that makes work like them as a modern computer. And to do all this fast calculation, you definitely need a lot of computers, right? So just for an example, take an airbag. You have these tiny little computers that make very, very fast decision. Modern airbags are looking continuously at the seat position, weight of the passenger on the driver, whether the seat belt is on or not, whether it has, what is the crash condition, what is the aftermath, and many factors that runs in an infinite loop, whether the airbag should be fired or not. So it makes around 100 million decisions per second. This is all happening in the very real time. Very, very real time. And also with cars like Tesla, you have this autopilot, adaptive cruise control, and many other things working together and making a lot of decisions, and with many sensors attached and working together. You definitely need a lot of computing power, right? Yes, your computer has your car has a computer, but the real question is how many? Any guesses how many computers your modern car might have? Just random guess? Yeah, somewhere close to 50 to 100 modern cars. So, your Teslas has somewhere around 50 to 60 ECUs, what we generally call electronic control units. The modern car has more than 50 to 60 ECUs, less than 100. So your car these days has as many as 50 computers, also called ECUs. The fancier your car, the more computer it has. Simply put, the ECU it has. Some of the ECUs are engine control, steering, door braking system, infotainment, and all of these sensors combined together. And at this point, you must be wondering why there are so many computers. It is because on your car, you got airbags, infotainment systems, door controller, engine controller, temperature controller, and telematics, and so on and so forth. So all of these components that I told needs to communicate with each other. Each component needs to communicate with the neighboring component, and those neighboring components need to interact with the neighboring component to share the large amount of data in a real time. Your tire pressure sensor being synchronized to infotainment system, internal combustion engine, sharing the data with the infotainment systems, and all this sort of information has to communicate with each other. And for that, you need a network. As modern automotives contain as much as 100 electronic control units, the safety of the vehicle relies on the near real-time communication between the various ECUs. Things like predicting the crash, detecting slides, anti-lock braking systems, and those stuff. Now, with all these things, they need to be networked, right? So these days, it is pretty much done using something called CAN, what is generally called Controller Area Network. So all of these ECU components talk to each other by sending the CAN packets. So in layman term, what really happens is in CAN bus is that the messages are sent on a bus, and the CAN network never determines who is the receiver. What is happening is all of this receiver receives the message and find out whether that is intended for them or not. They have something called arbitration ID, receiver's ID, and then they find out whether that particular message is for me or not. That's how generally it works. So the whole point of this talk is to explore the CAN bus. So we're going to talk a lot about CAN bus in a brief. The CAN, as I told, is an older technology. It was built somewhere around 1986, and still most of the car manufacturers use this CAN bus. Nothing has changed over the year, and it still is the same. If you look at all of these components that you see here, I think there are around 20 components. They all are connected to each other using CAN network, CAN bus. So as I said, typically your modern car has as much as 100 controllers, many of which are networked to communicate with each other. These computerized devices go by different names. Some may call it as electronic control unit, some may call it as a engine control unit, and some may call it even a transmission control unit, TCUs. So basically it's, and some call it even transmission control module. So it's basically the same. ECU is any controller that typically has a microcomputer inside it with a bunch of wires and peripherals. That is running a small algorithm in a closed loop and waiting for some input. And once the input is fed, they make some decision based on that. And the output is in the actuating. It's an actuator. So mechanical components like moving a steering, engine combustion to make critical decision like airbags, anti-braking systems, etc. These issues generally have something called closed loop. This is a scheme that monitors the output of a car system and controls the input. So it's not going to take any input that is not intended for it. So what ECU generally does is gathering the data from dozens of different sensors and performs millions of calculations per second. Also, ECU is responsible for minimal emission and the best mileage. One fun fact is that modern ECUs contain 32-bit 40 megahertz processor. But you might be surprised how does that even work in a real time, and how does it perform faster than our normal computer? It is because the code that runs on the ECUs is very much optimized, very much efficient, and no bloatware. And that is because your ECUs performs on 32-bit 40 megahertz processors. Now let's talk about car hacking. And as automobile networks are increasingly getting complex, they're running millions of lines of code. They've got hundreds of ECUs, hundreds of sensors, yet they employ the decade-old protocol called CAN bus protocol, and with little or no security. Furthermore, the tools needed to access these CAN bus are widely available at very little or no cost. There are many softwares that are available for free to use and doesn't cost and is available for everybody to use. And as I said, the underlying communication system is a CAN bus. There is also this CAN bus also is a control area network that has remained unchanged for many years. Also, learning to car hacking can be good as well as bad for you. Looking at the good side, you get to understand how your vehicle system works. You can learn how to modify the vehicle system, sometimes even discover the undocumented features. Sometimes your vehicle may come up with features that may not be necessarily documented. You can use these techniques to discover them, as well as use the full potential of a vehicle. And more importantly, you can become your own penetration tester and validate the security for your car automobile. So now let's look into the history of car hacking. Now the history of modern car hacking goes back in 2015 when these two researchers, Charlie Miller and Chris Valsek, they hacked into a car called Jeep Cherokee, a 2015 model. You might have probably heard about the Jeep hack. So these are the two guys. They remotely controlled the braking, steering, throttle, and other controls of a 2015 Jeep Cherokee. They demonstrated that it was possible to remotely control the vehicle control unit from a telematics unit that had a cellular network. How they gained access from a cellular network to intra-vehicular network is from a CAN bus. Then they identified the automotive data packets should be protected with something called mechanisms like TLS and encryption, but sadly it was not addressed by any of the car manufacturers. Before these two security researchers, the car hacking attempt was made. There were other car hackers who hacked these cars before 2015 as well, but these two guys got the media attention as it was not a physical. They didn't have to be present physically. The attack was based on the remote. I think there was another high-profile attack on a 2016 Tesla Model S by Tencent Keen Security Lab. You may want to look into that as well. And while most of these cyber physical attack vectors were rapidly not accessed by the manufacturer, fundamental security concern still remains the same, especially when the physical access to the vehicle is possible from the CAN bus and OBD ports. Now let's look into the cars and automotives from a security standpoint. let's get into identifying the attack surface and how can we get inside the car network. So if you come from a software penetration testing world, you might be already familiar with the term called attack surface. When discussing the attack surface, we are not considering how to exploit a target or how to deliver a payload. We're only concerned with the entry points to it. The entry point may not be necessarily the actual points, may not necessarily be the vulnerable. But before you start looking into identifying the attack surface, you must ask these few questions to yourself. First, you need to identify whether there was any signals received or not, whether they do have any software-defined radio signals or not, any key signals, radio waves are being received or not. Once you're familiar with this, you should also look into if there is any physical keypad or not, so that you can inject commands from there. And if you wish to get into CAN bus, you should figure out the ways to access the CAN bus. Figure out if there are any diagnostic ports or not. So if you're not aware of diagnostic port, in the all the modern cars that is manufactured after 2008, somewhere in the passenger seat or in the driver's seat down your dash, you do have a small diagnostic port which should be available to you, and you don't need even a screwdriver to open up that. It's available there. Also, it is not necessary that all the car manufacturers will have the OBD-II. They may have a different version of that. I mean, they may even have the different diagnostic ports, but you need to find out some of these ports that may help you get access to the CAN bus. Also, you need to figure out if there is any infotainment systems or not. If there is any component that interacts directly to the car network or not. If there is any Bluetooth or not. Once you have all these questions answered, figure out if there are other entry points or not. If you get hold of all these things, then you have identified the attack surface, and you must be already aware that all the modern automotive provides the ways to physically access the car network. One of them I mentioned is OBD-II. So now let's look into this picture and see what all other attack surfaces. As you know, the car hacking has become increasingly complex and computerized. So does the attack surface. This attack surface has just grown over the time. Let's look into one of these attack surface. The first one is the infotainment system. The Jeep Cherokee car hack was one of the brilliant example of how cellular networks can be used in infotainment to get access to the CAN bus or the vehicle network system. Also in the infotainment system, Bluetooth now has become a de facto standard for supporting the hand-free calls and sharing of music and whatever stuff. But the point is that the lowest level of the protocol is implemented in the hardware itself. So this could also serve as an attack surface for the modern vehicle. Also in the infotainment, you have these mobile apps. These mobile apps have the functionality to lock and unlock the vehicle. You could use this to reverse engineer and find out some sort of APIs, and maybe these APIs could act as an attack surface as well. You do even have Wi-Fi's in the infotainment system. This could be used to access the vehicle network from a Wi-Fi range of around 300 meters. 300 meters. This possibly could be used to install malicious code into infotainment unit. Also, there is something called RKE, which is named as remote key access, remote keyless entry. All of these entry cards now have the remote keyless entry, right? So these things have suffered as a key fob attack to remotely open the door, activate the alarms and flashlight, etc. The key fob attack could also send a malformed request to your car vehicle network that can put the vehicle in an unknown state, so it doesn't perform anything. Cloning the key fob, jamming the car signals, draining the power from the key fob are one of the attacks that could be used to exploit. As well as the one which I have mentioned here, there is an image called OBD-II, which gives direct access to the CAN bus. This is what we'll be spending most of our day talking about. OBD-II port can access all of the CAN components, all of the CAN bus in a vehicle. This is the same bus that your car technician uses to identify the fault codes and then perform some regular maintenance checks. This OBD port could be used to send the CAN package to the CAN bus and then install the remote diagnostic devices and make the CAN bus even possible from the remote attack. We'll get to see how OBD-II ports could be used to access the internal CAN network as well towards the end of this talk. So now, if we see the attack surface from the bird's eye view, when you're trying to identify the attack surface in a vehicle, you need to think as a bad guy. What are the components that I might possibly break into? What are the components that could be possibly weak in design by nature? The bird's eye view gives you a detailed explanation on how data can enter into a vehicle. These rectangular boxes that you see here are the inputs. separated by these dotted lines, which is a perimeter. Here you can see the data is being entered from the external surface like your cellular, Bluetooth, TPMS, KS, as well as when you see in the internal one, you have these infotainment systems, the one which I told you, Bluetooth is directly accessible in the hardware level. So you have the infotainment system, USB, OBD-II connector, canvas splicing, all these sort of things. While some of these attacks might seem unrealistic because you need to have a physical access to it, and even with the physical access, there's nothing you could do, probably a very little harm or no harm at all. So before we get into the car hacking, let's look at the different networks available in a car. The first one that you see is a CAN bus. CAN bus was released in 1986, stands for Controller Area Network, developed by Bosch, and is now mandatory for all the car manufacturers manufactured after 2008. But this came way before than this. In the production vehicle, it was in 1991. CAN is actually a very simple protocol. The reason why I said simple is because it just has two wires, CAN high and CAN low. Actually, CAN uses different signaling, which means that when a signal is sent to the CAN bus, CAN raises the voltage on one of these lines on the CAN high and lowers the voltage on the other line called CAN low. This differential voltage, differential signaling is very much useful for the cases when you have to identify and do the fault tolerance. And this is why CAN is pretty much used, because it has fault tolerance in all the vehicles. You have these other networks, manufacturer may use any of them. You have got this SAE-J1850 protocol, which is developed in 1994. It is older and slower than CAN, but much cheaper to implement than CAN. You have got this local interconnect network protocol, which is cheapest among all. This actually is being used with the CAN to complement the CAN to communicate between the several components, and then even have MOST and the FlexRay. FlexRay is actually the highest speed one with the 10 Mbps. Your CAN only serves 1 Mbps. But the problem with this is it's very expensive to implement, as well as this is actually being used for sensitive communication, like suppose your anti-braking systems, steering controls, and all these things. But today we'll focus most of the time talking about only the CAN bus. So this brings us to the CAN bus. You need to understand CAN before you even decide to play with the car. In the modern car, airbags, braking, cruise control, electric power steering, and all this sort of information, so many components exist, right? So these different components need to communicate and read the state from each other. The problem could be easily fixed by using one-to-one wiring. Suppose when you have a different component like airbag, you have steering and the engine control, just 3 components. All what you can do is you can connect this infotainment to the airbag, airbag to the infotainment, back to infotainment to steering, steering to these braking systems. So as the component size starts increasing, the wiring is going to get very messy, right? The more component you have, the more bundle of wire is going to have. So this is when the boss came up with the idea of CAN bus, where you can just have 2 wires, CAN high and CAN low, and all the components are going to get connected to each other using these just two wires, CAN high and CAN low. So it integrates all of these complex components in such an elegant way that all of these components can interact with each other in a very fast data rate. In CAN bus, there are just 2 wires, 2 physical wires that connect to the dashboard to the engine to the steering, and all this sort of stuff. The CAN bus protocol allows ECUs to communicate with each other without complex dedicated wiring in between. You don't have to worry about, suppose if any day you wanted to put up some new component to your car, you don't have to worry about inventing the new bus. You can just implement on top of the CAN bus. So what happens is, when the bit is transmitted in a CAN bus, the signal will simultaneously broadcast one voltage higher and one voltage lower. So when the CAN bus is resting, the voltage that you see is 2.5 volt. But when you send, depending on what kind of data packet is sent, either it's going to be 1 voltage higher or 1 voltage lower. That's going to be either 3.5 or either 1.5 volts. The sensors and the ECUs have a transceiver that you see here. The transceiver is actually responsible for either accepting or rejecting the packets. The CAN generally consists of 3 different components: a transceiver, a CAN controller, and a microcontroller. A transceiver converts data stream of voltage from a CAN bus for others to understand that, for other electronic units to understand that, as well as a transceiver converts, the controller actually acts as a link layer between the node. So what if the CAN was never invented? So this is going to happen. Before the CAN was invented, automotive manufacturer used this point-to-point wiring system. It was working perfectly fine until we had a lot of components, many components. So imagine you have, when I said about just three components, the wiring was already messy. It had almost around 6 wires. So imagine with all these 100 ECUs working together, how messy is the wiring going to be? It's going to be a real big wire, right? So it was even expensive to maintain. So this was fixed by CAN. In car, you have the components like engine control, airbag, and transmission. All of these simply connect to the CAN using the 2 wires, CAN high and CAN low. But the question is, but why the CAN bus? The main advantage of the CAN bus is that it is high resilience to the noise, reliability, low cost, and simple to implement, and ease of use. The disadvantages are that the data packet lengths are very small, of 8 bytes. The transmission rates are low, and the message transmission cycle can vary, and no encryption mechanisms. Also, CAN bus uses differential signaling, which means when a signal is sent, CAN raises the voltage on one line and drops the voltage equally on the other line. So as I told you earlier, suppose when the CAN packet is sent on one of these bus, and in the ideal state it is 2.5 volt. So when the voltage is sent, it drops the same amount of voltage on one line and increases on the other line, either in the CAN high or either in the CAN low. This is what it makes tolerant to the tolerant to the noise. One of the reasons as to why CAN is efficient is because CAN packets are normally prioritized through Identifier in such a way that those with the highest priority are not interrupted. So suppose if the data packet is coming from the steering, it needs to have a higher priority than your infotainment system data, right? So it has something called arbitration and priority, which we will talk. Another disadvantage is that the data flowing through CAN is not at all encrypted. It's just in the plain text that you can easily, it's in the hex values that you can easily decode back. And call it as an advantage or disadvantage, it has been mandated by the law as well. Every car manufactured after 2008 needs to have this CAN bus. The CAN also supports OBD-II connector, which can be used for diagnostic purpose. As I told you, this is the same exactly what a mechanic uses to identify the faults in your car. Some call it as a DLC called diagnostic link controller, or some may call it as a OBD. It's the same thing, which gives you access to the internal network. So now let me explain you how the CAN bus exactly works. This is how exactly CAN bus works to physical wires, CAN high and CAN low. It's communicating to each of these nodes. The way these nodes can still communicate with each other. Transceiver is a transmitter and the receiver in just one component. It converts the data into CAN controller supplies into electrical signal and then sends this data over. In the data bus line, it receives the data and controls this data for the controller to use that. But now when you look at the CAN controller, it has something called microcontroller unit. The microcontroller unit is what makes the decision based on the data that is coming in. So if I have to explain, another really clear picture that explains is that if you see all of these components, they are hooked together with just 2 wires directly to the CAN bus, and that you see the port here is the OBD port that I'm talking about. So all of this just connects with the 2 wires. So if you're sometimes looking for the CAN bus, CAN wires in your car network, there are a few tips for finding the CAN bus. One of the tips is that you can look for a twisted pair cables. So generally the CAN bus is going to have just 2 wires. And then if you take out your multimeter and check for the voltage, it's going to have 2.5 volt when it is resting. So then this could be a CAN. And you can even check the resistance. So if it is 120 ohm resistance between these 2 wires splitted, that is 60 ohms. So it's going to be probably a CAN. That's how you identify the CAN bus in a car network. So now let's talk about the data frame in a CAN. This is the most important part of a CAN message. In order to receive reverse engineer the CAN data, you need to understand about these data frames. At the primitive level, this is how exactly the CAN bus looks like. You have this diagram of a CAN frame. The one in the green that you see is an identifier, which is responsible for priority of the message. The blue that you see is a remote transmission request, which is also called RTR. The yellow that you see is the data length code, which says how long is the data, the actual data in the red color. And the actual data that is being sent to the CAN bus is denoted by the red color. So now in the CAN bus, it is very important to give the priority to the message. The packet coming from the infotainment system cannot have the higher priority or the same priority than that of ABS systems, right? So this is handled by something called arbitration. The really cool thing is that the one with the lowest numerical value is going to have the highest priority. So suppose if the packet is coming from the infotainment system, it's going to have the very high ID, as well as if it is coming from the lowest, ABS system is going to have the lowest, because it needs to have the highest priority. That is how CAN decides which packet to accept and which packet to reject. If there are two packets coming at the same time, it needs to have the arbitration. Suppose if there are two nodes sending the messages at the very same time, the messages with the dominant ID or the highest ID will override the one with the lowest ID. So now this is how exactly the actual CAN message packet looks like. So in this, you can see that the message is of 8 bytes. The one I told you earlier, the message is always going to be of 8 bytes. So if you see here, the message, the one in the red color is of 8 bytes, right? So this is the same zoomed version of that, magnified version of that. If you see in the first one that there is something called ID, is again, the lower the ID, the higher the priority. The higher the ID, the lesser the priority. That's how exactly it works. So if you see here, the first 2 bytes of data, that is 0x0b and then 0xb8, if you convert the hex to the integer value, the 0b and b8 is going to convert to something called 3000 in decimal. That's going to be 3000 in decimal, and that's how the your dashboard instrument cluster knows that 0x0b and 0b8 0xb8 is 3000 in RPM, and the tachometer just runs to the 3000. So if any day you are going to try reverse engineering the packet, this is how exactly you do. Identify the arbitration ID, and then once you have the arbitration ID, find out what exactly data is being sent. So if you just convert 0x0b8 to integer, that's going to be 3000, and the tachometer exactly shows to 3000. So if you someday wanted to inject the fake package to the tachometer and then spoof the tachometer to 10,000, you can use the same way. We have the demo towards the end of this talk. So now, just to show you how exactly the CAN bus exactly looks like when it is captured or intercepted or whatever you feel like in the computer interface, this is how exactly it looks like. If I break down the column, the first one that you see is the interface that is working on. So right now I'm running on the virtual CAN interface vCAN0. And the second one that you see is an arbitration ID. Again, lower the size, lower the value here, higher the priority. And then third one that you see is a CAN, the length of the packets. So if you see here, I told you earlier, the CAN messages are going to be of 8 byte. Maximum that you can see here is of 8 byte, and the minimum can be 0. It can be less than 8. There's a utility called socket CAN, also called CAN utils. The output of the CAN dump, this is an output of a CAN dump actually. So now, the journey so far, we have talked about how exactly modern car works. We have talked about issues. We have even talked about how the message frame looks like. But what could be next? The next thing that could be is getting access to the OBD port. Now you have already understanding of the CAN packets. You know how to reverse engineer them. You know the arbitration. The next thing is getting access to one of these OBD ports. So how to find out these OBD ports? Once you're aware of CAN bus, you might want to inject these packets into the once you are aware of CAN bus, you might want to inject this packet into CAN bus, right? So the diagnostic ports are the solution for that. Go find out the diagnostic port in a car, because CAN bus is accessible via the diagnostic port. While there are hundreds of different diagnostic ports, one of the very common that you find in all the modern cars is the OBD port. As I said earlier, you can find it somewhere towards the passenger seat or maybe even the driver's seat down the dash. If I've ever played with the car, you might have seen these small ports, right? So these are the same OBD ports. Now you have something called OBD-II. This OBD-II represents the most direct access to the CAN network. It is found in vehicle that has been produced after 1996. For vehicle emission, the government has done this mandatory. So this gives direct access to the CAN bus. If you see in the OBD port, if you see the pin out, I think I have a slide for that. If you see this pin out, the pin number 6 and pin number 14 are going to be the CAN high and CAN low respectively. So that's where you are going to inject the packets. And then so you have this plus 12 volts in the pin number 16. That's going to be always on. 12 volt has to be supplied through there. I think pretty much that's it about OBD-II. Now to do all this sort of CAN spoofing, CAN exploitation, what are the hardware and software that you need in order to interact with the CAN bus? In order for you to interact with the CAN bus, since you already have now access to the OBD-II, you need something like USB to CAN. So this CAN bus has to be connected to your computer, and your computer doesn't understand any of these packets, right? So you understand any of this. So you need to have something like a USB to CAN. So it's going to be connected to your OBD-II connector and then back to your computer. So you can use USB to CAN. Now on the software part, you need something to encode and decode the message, right? And then on the other hand, you need to have a software that can read and write these CAN packets. So we have a solution for this. Socket CAN comes readily available on all of your Linux systems, with which you can spoof this temperature, tachometer, speedometer, and so on and so forth. So we'll start with the hardware. All of these hardware that you see here are easily available in the market. They all differ in terms of data rate. There are higher end devices like Kevasher, EMS, and Makina. They serve the purpose, but they are overkill and expensive. They have the higher data rate, like Kevasher has a higher data rate and it's really expensive compared to the Makina M2. I mostly use this small tool called Makina M2. This is a really good device. You even have Corline USB to CAN, which is even lesser cheaper than this Makina M2, which solves your purpose, and actually it's really good. And sometimes when you go to the Amazon or wherever, some might suggest you with this ALM327 based dongle, which has a Bluetooth on it. Trust me, they're really terrible for hacking and do not serve our purpose, because the data rate that you might get from there is very low, and you might miss a lot of packet, really a lot of packet. So these are terrible for hacking, and don't use this ALM327. You can use either of these. I've personally used USB to CAN and Makina M2. They're really good. Makina actually have, so what this Makina has is you can attach your Wi-Fi adapter, and you can launch the attack from remotely as well. This is a really good device. Now on the software side, you may have very expensive and proprietary tool. The tools which I told earlier, the Kevasher and EMS, the worst part is that they even have the software that are proprietary, and you have to purchase them as well. So all of these tools that that cost you, or the open source one, they more or less solves the purpose. You can always go for these free and open source tools. We're not going to talk about all those expensive tools, since we are focused on how to get started cheap and fast, right? So we have this Socket CAN, and then you have this another tool called CAN Utils. Socket CAN actually comes pre-installed in all of your Linux machine. That is Linux module for the CAN interface. And you even have a tool called Canard, which is a Python tool. It's a Python library. You can use the Canard if you someday wanted to inject the packet by writing your Python codes. You can use this Canard as well. And Cardloop is also a really interesting tool. Today we'll focus mostly on getting the demo from CAN Utils and vCAN. But before we move into the demo, I really want you to get comfortable with all the tools that we'll use for CAN exploitation. The first one that you see is a Socket CAN. As I told you, Socket CAN is a CAN driver for the Linux. In layman terms, actually Socket CAN literally gives you something like CAN 0 instead of ETH0. So if you are aware of ETH0 in a computer networking, it gives you the same way called CAN 0 in the for the control area network. And you can even use ifconfig with that as well to find out what exactly is happening. Once you get this working, there is another package called CAN Utils, which has other smaller mini utilities called CAN Send, CAN Sniffers, CAN Dump. These are really good tools to play with. CAN Sniffers, CAN Dump, just a moment, yeah. So you have this CAN Dump, which displays, filters, and log the CAN packets. You have this CAN Player, which does the replay attack. So if you wanted to perform the replay attack, you have this CAN Player. You have this CAN Send. So if you someday wanted to send the fake CAN packets, you can do it using CAN Send. CANSEN is actually an interesting tool if you wanted to generate some random packets and a random arbitration ID. You can use this CANSEN tool. And the CAN Sniffer actually displays the CAN content differences. CAN Dump and CAN Sniffer works pretty much almost same. The only difference is that with CAN Sniffer you can do the colorization. So if there is any change in some of the ID, you can see what is changing. So let's look into the demo about CAN Utils. So I'm going to open two terminals right now. So to start the virtual CAN interface, to do any stuff, first you need to have a virtual CAN interface, right? So right now, since we do not have any virtual CAN interface, what we can really do is we can load the kernel modules using something called sudo I can't see from here. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So what we can do is you can load the kernel modules for the CAN. And then same thing for virtual CAN as well. So once we load this interface of virtual CAN, kernel modules with this virtual CAN and the CAN, we can use some command like sudo ip link. We can 0 of type we can. So since I've already started the interface, I can just show you if config we can 0. So you can see there is a virtual CAN interface already running here. So what we can do is, as I told you, CANgen just generates the random packets, right? So I can just use CAN sniffer, CANgen on the virtual CAN interface 0. So it's going to start the packets. Now, since most of you might be already aware of a tool called Wireshark, you can even use Wireshark to capture these packets. So I'll just start the Wireshark, and you can see here there is an interface called virtual CAN 0. If you see here, you'll get to see this, the CANgen is dumping a lot of random packets, right? So if I'll just click on one of these, and you can see all this information. Data is 4 bytes. Length is 4 bytes, and all this information using Wireshark. You can use whatever tool you feel like. But that can be also done using CAN dump. We'll use CAN dump later. We'll use CAN sniffer. CAN sniffer, we can 0. So you can see whatever the CAN messages that is being generated by the CANgen is actually displayed here. So if you see the same screenshot that I showed you earlier with the arbitration ID, and then the message is being shown here. The best part about the CAN sniffer is that you can use a command like C and then press enter to see what all data are being changed. So right now I just did C and then enter. So you can see all this data on the particular ID that is being changed. Similarly, you can use tools like CAN dump to dump all these packets in storage somewhere, so you can perform the replay attack, and then add the tool called CAN play, which I'll give you a demo on how to replay those packets. So the myth fact is that the entry barrier for whatever myth or fact, the entry barrier to car hacking is much more high. Everybody says that, right? The fact is that you don't even need to have car to learn car hacking. You can use this tool called ICSim, which I'll show you how to install that. And then the other myth is that you need to have expensive software and hardware toolkit. The thing is that you'll get many other open source tools to use it for free. And then you might also need expensive hardware for CAN hacking, which is true in some case. You might need to use expensive hardware if a car is actually generating a lot of packet at the higher data rate. You might want to use that. But partly you can do all of these things using CAN, USB to CAN, and these are pretty much cheaper as well. So today we'll be using this tool called ICSim, Instrument Cluster Simulator. This is from Open Garage, and the same guy, Chris from the Craig Smith. So this requires the STL2 libraries, STL2 image for this image, and then CAN utils. So you can install this using just a moment. So this has all this dashboard with the speedometer, door lock. If you want to lock and unlock the door, it has all the doors. It has turn signal indicators as well. You can see on those left and right turn signals. You can apply acceleration, brakes, all this sort of stuff from your keyboard as well. So it even has a control panel to interact with the automotive network. So to do this attack, what are the general methodology for car hacking? The first thing that you might want to do is get an access to the CAN bus. In a real car, if you want to do, get an access to the CAN bus, sniff the packet, reverse engineer those CAN packets, and identify the arbitration ID. So if you want to find spoof the tachometer, find out from which arbitration ID it is coming from. So what I use is first I do the CAN dump, and then divide the CAN dump into first two different halves, and then find out if it is in the first half that is actually being the tachometer is being going up or down in the second half. So this is generally called binary search, so binary half. So you can just follow that, and then once you identify the arbitration ID, you can just perform the replay attack and see whether that actually ID is what is performing or not. So to set up the ICSim, this SDL library called Simple Direct Media Layer, which is used for this graphics and audio purpose. You can install it using sudo apt-get install. You can take a picture of this tool, and you can download the ICSim from this zombie cracks GitHub library called ICSim.git. So now let's look into the demo about ICSim. Yeah, so I'm going to start the ICSim in vcan 0 interface, and then you'll get this dashboard, really nice dashboard that you have all these turn signal indicators, you have this tachometer, you have all these doors. Right now, since there is no any packet that is being sent to any of these IDs, arbitration IDs, we can start the controller. To start the controller, you can just use controls vcan 0. So now, the moment when you start this controller, you can see the tachometer slowly moves. That means the controller is actually up and running. So if I just do here up arrow key, and then you can see the tachometer is running. Now let's perform the replay attack. And if you wanted to send how exactly the data is being done, again, I can always run can sniffer -c vcan 0. So you can see all the changes in the data here. So if I do left and right, you might see one of these data are being changed in either of these IDs. Since I believe reverse engineered the packets and found out this arbitration ID by just dividing it into one half, the other half the same way, you can spend your time finding out what exactly is the ID that the packet is being sent. What I can show you is I can show you the replay attack, how to perform the replay attack. So we can do can dump -alpha file, and then interfaces vcan 0 alpha log. So the moment when I do that, I can just increase the tachometer here, and then I can just turn on these left and right signals. So I can just cancel this packet, and then I can use another tool called can player. So can player -I and can dump log. So you can see that now it's going to do the same thing what I had done is the replay attack, right? So the tachometer is going to move up and down, the left and right signals are going to still work. This is how it works. But if you see the file here, it's going to be a really big file. You have got these packets and the interface and the packet that when it was sent. So now you might be wondering, so since there are a lot of things happening here, suppose if you just wanted to send see some packet from particular ID, what can I do? You can use can sniffer -c. I'll not use -c vcan 0. So now since it's sniffing, you can just do minus and then 6 zeros. So it's going to hide all of this data. So now whatever you feel like, whatever IDs you feel like adding, you can just do plus like suppose 40C. So you can see whatever is happening, you can see in this 40C and then see, yeah, so this color indicates that there is a change in the data packets. You can add up using plus 40C plus whatever the ID that you want to add. And then another thing, like suppose if you wanted to send the can packets, you can do something like can send and then vcan 0. I have already identified the IDs for one of these packets, so it's I think 188 has 01. So you can see if you see the left turn signal, that's going to blink for a while. If I want to do it over and over, I can just write while true do I'm going to sleep up 1 second and then done. So you can see that in the left signals being turned on and off, the packet that what you see has 01 is being sent. So when I reverse engineered that, I found out it even accepts 02, 03, 02. Actually, if you reverse engineer that, you will find out it's for right signal. 03 is for both of these parking signals. So you can see that parking signal is also working. Similarly, you can spoof the tachometer signals as well. So I think tachometer, I've written it down somewhere here. Tachometer is working on 244. So Sorry. So you can see that tachometer is actually moving up and forward, right? So I can increase the speed, sleep time. I can just do it like 10 seconds. So it's going to stay there for like 2 seconds, and you can see that. So once you reverse engineer that packet, last one, what I wrote, 2863, whatever is that, you can see if you reverse engineer that is going to be the integer value for the RPM, miles per hour. So this is pretty much almost everything that you can perform with the real car. There are even IDs for all of these 4 doors. You can open these 4 doors using, if you want to use keyboard, I think Shift A. You can open all of these 4 doors and turn signals and tachometer. You can play with this before even you get your hands on with real cars. So now there's a fun tip if you really wanted to dosh your car. Since you already know the lowest ID actually always wins, what you can do is the way arbitration priority works in CAN is this one with the lowest ID with the highest priority, as I already explained earlier. The way basically it works is when multiple nodes are being sent, the lowest ID actually gets a priority, and the highest ID, the highest priority actually is being replaced by the lowest ID. So what exactly is going to happen is, so if you see this packet, while 1, if it is true, sending the package to the ID 0, that's going to dosh your car. So suppose if I'm sending 0 is for probably the critical things like ABS, braking systems and all this. So 0 is always going to be, the highest priority. So if you send a continuous packet to the 0 ID, it's going to dosh your car. This is the fun tip. So we have come towards the end of this talk. If you want to get started into further car hacking, there's this book called Car Hacker's Handbook by the Open Garages. This is a really nice book that you should actually get into if you want to get started into car hacking. And then there are other things that you might want to try on CAN utils and socket CAN. I could only show you some of these things here. And then you can follow the Open Garages. They do have awesome documentation. They do have awesome PPTs, slides, and DEFCON talks, all this sort of stuff. So you can get started with that as well. And Charlie Miller and Chris Welchek research is always good in automotive security. You can follow them as well. So I've come towards the end of my talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yogesh. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Thank you so much for the open source toolbox. I just wanted to ask, did you try to do any kind of analysis on autonomous cars?
Sorry, I haven't done anything.
No?
No, I've not done.
Do you think from this perception that it would be easy or difficult?
I think I'd seen, I don't remember, it was, I think Lex Friedman, he was working on something like autonomous vehicle where they had attached the same sort of OBD connector in Tesla cars. So I think in the autonomous vehicle also this OBD should still work.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not very exactly sure about that.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Any other questions? We'll go to the Slido questions then. Neo has asked, as you mentioned, there is no encryption in CAN bus, but there is secure CAN, which uses encryption. Could you please tell us if it's possible to use secure CAN instead of CAN to encrypt 8 bytes of data?
Yeah, secure CAN actually exists, but the implementation, since because of implementation cost, secure CAN is not actually implementing all of these cars. I think there are some of the cars that actually uses this secure CAN. If I'm not wrong, it's Audi or BMW, I'm not very exactly sure, but some of the car manufacturers use secure CAN. Since they're expensive to implement, nobody has actually done it in the production ready cars.
Nice. Is Neo in the audience? You can grab your prize at the end. The next question, does CAN bus use its own protocol for communication, or does it utilize something like TCP or UDP?
It uses something like a TCP UDP. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate, or does that answer? Okay. And maybe we have time for one more question. Can it run IDS, IPS on the car environment? Can someone run an IDS or IPS on the car environment?
Yes, you can always run IDS IPS, but the problem is again, it's always going to be expensive to maintain that, right? You can always have an IDS IPS in the CAN bus that prevents all of these packets that is being injected. But since it's going to be really expensive to maintain that, I don't think any car manufacturer would have the IDS and IPS.
With the advent of people constantly trying to hack on cars, would it make sense to add on that expense?
It should not be the case actually. The automotive manufacturers should implement this IDS, IPS and encryption TLS mechanism, but it all depends on them, right?
Okay, sure. And maybe the last one, sorry. Given that cars have internal networks and interact with external ones, is it feasible to monitor and collect data for them, like regular endpoints, for the purpose of attack detection?
Does he wants to know that whether this can be done remotely? I'm not sure. Given the car's internal networks interact with it, it's feasible to monitor and collect the data.
Yeah, let's say it's remotely.
So since I showed you one of these devices like Makina M2, this has capability to add a Wi-Fi adapter on top of this. Even have a micro SD card here. You can log this CAN packets that you can use it for later purpose.
Okay, perfect. So if anyone was inspired by Yogesh talk, you could always check out the hardware hacking village outside to get a hands-on experience on it as well. Oh, we have one more question.
What kind of fixes or countermeasures would you recommend against these attacks?
One of these fixes could be using the encryption, so that having a private key in one of your small hardware chip devices, so that once you have the encryption, it's really difficult for you, without getting the private keys, it's really difficult for you to reverse engineer them, right? And then the other thing that you can have is implementing the IDS and IPS so that you could not inject the fake packets from the OBD ports. That could be one of the possible solutions for this one.
Okay, let's all give Yogesh another hand of applause.
I'll get back to you.